Was my own reassurance bouncing round 100,000 times in my own ecosphere. If every time you speak you keep it off the record, consequently you can keep your record clear. And if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the basosphere condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink 'em twice. Welcome to your ecosphere.
Sorry I'm so gloomy, but the gloom is half the mood. Welcome to the country where they throw out half the food. Like fuck you if you're hungry, we got better things to do. Got a million more priorities than human rights for you.
Just empty stomachs wandering an empty store, with shelves as empty as our craters left on distant shores. They mark the spot where once a country thrived that even tried to help its poor. Now in its place a fascist state where rape is just a tool of war. I guess they took a page from out the book we used in '64. Villagers we stacked in graves, caked in fucking Agent Orange. Now cut to yesterday, Afghanistan endures the very storm that swept its way through Vietnam, where even now the blood is warm. And even now Fallujah celebrates to see a baby born who's not deformed, not warped by little presents we left hidden in the dirt, courtesy of all your friends at the World Economic Forum. Courtesy of civilized political decorum. Unity across the aisle, both sides agreeing via war crime quorum. I'd like to say that when they start the midterm texts, I'll be able to ignore them, but I know myself well enough to know I'm gonna draw them all rhetorically, then verbally I'll quarter them, lyrically I'll carpet bomb and mortar them, purely via metaphor I'll bury them alive, but upside down, with the utmost blasphemy intended out of spite. Now lyrically I'll lead them by the eyes, cause lyrically I'm still beneath the ice, scratching at the surface for a purpose they deny. And every time they smile and they look me in the eyes, suddenly I'm 6 feet under subprime, 6 feet standing firmly in between you and the sunrise. And now your movement's as restricted as the sunrise. Now it's crippled into parody like Occupy. Young hearts be free, young Turks here to slowly poison hearts and minds, here to get them speaking press release in record time. here to get them, standing up for AOC and every other Langley plant who sprays a coat of tax the rich across their Semper Fi. Now the skies are nice and clear, the drones are set to fly. They're following the pipeline of how the West was won to how the West declined, to how the West made debt into a genocide, to how the West demolishes a picket line, to how the West contaminates a riverside, to how the West's war crimes are glamorized, to how the West protects the kind of medical neglect that is infanticide at best and is at worst an ethnic cleansing rite. Now, it's safe to say it's all fun and games until the feds arrive. Oh, shit. Last stand, and I came to deliver. Been called a Clinton operative, a Russian, and a grifter. By libs, a washing student debt, proud to be an intern, sucking up to pigs who get a tax cut in the midterms. You cut the ties but never heal the wrist burns. Capitalist shackles wrap and penetrate like ringworms around the necks of those whose deaths will not affect the king's purse or the coffers of the company the king serves, who manufacture mandated tinctures, their safety data hanging from a fixture, half a mile skyward, just dangling from the rafters. My grift is sobbing till I'm cackling with laughter. I guess I would've made a decent actor. I'd be great at crying on command until they cut plus 40 minutes after. When the director waves a hand, it ain't a rap, it's now a legal matter. Honey, my grift is weeping on a mic until I'm hacking up airstrike verses like it's bombs away and batter up. Swinging on these bigots, they keep killing us to fatten up. Kill the switch, eat the rich, I think they're finally fat enough. Grab your knife and fork, the world is yours, just say you've had enough. And if you're comfy, you could go ahead and laugh it up. Tell me how the most important vote I'll ever cast is like the choosing of a bus, in that it might not take you anywhere you want, but no one can deny the fact the bus is now no longer where it was. And that's the kind of progress we should celebrate and trust. Spoken like a kid who never took a bus. Spoken like a piece of shit that used some cash to mask his stink and truly thinks he's one of us. Spoken like a terminally unserious person who equates our cries for rights to mixed up orders from a server. It paints a privileged picture of what you would label urgent if the worst thing you've experienced in life has been the time your waiter accidentally brought a tray of gold flake scallop when you clearly ordered gold flake urchin. And now you're storming out the restaurant and hopping in a Tesla. You got 80 pounds of Tony Fauci merchant.
Rewind 2 chains won't make you wait in such a long line. Life's not just a way to waste your free time. Air that's fit to breathe is not a free ride. Free ride. Rewind 2 chains won't make you wait in such a long line. Life's not just a way to waste your free time. Air that's fit to breathe is not a free ride. Free ride.
Best to place your bets on weaponizing the identity of every limp progressive claiming grassroots integrity. Policy is a slippery slope for all of its complexity, so flex your brave resistance with this Ilhan Omar NFT. Numbered 1 of 723. Each depicts her valiantly championing a bill before she lays it at a donor's feet. And she can throw her hands up in the air with AOC and say if only Nina Turner could have voted present too. That's why we need another seat. We need some more progressives we elect to only tweet, who live to serve humana and their label of elective slapped on every patient's gravest needs. And every station plays the theme that medical professionals agree on the effectiveness and safety of injections authorized for this emergency. And in purely unrelated news, the profits of the ones who manufacture vaccines just increased by nearly 36 billion with a fucking B. Sometimes it feels like we're the only ones that see. Sometimes it feels like all of us are lost at sea. And every time we think we see an island on the tip of the horizon, it turns out to be another measure making sure we're kept within the watchful eye of murderous authority. And so I guess my grift is crying for the future they denied us, where the people who would buy us are a mockable minority. And we are more than genomes under warranty. And we are more than serfs in constant quarantine. If I had a single breath left, I'd let the chorus scream. I'd announce our leaders claiming none for all and more for me. None for all and more for me. None for all and more for me. None for all and more for me.
Rewind to a chance won't make you wait in such a long line. Life's not just a way to waste your free time. Air that's fit to breathe is not a free ride. Free ride. Rewind to a chance won't make you wait in such a long line. Life's not just a way to waste your free time. Air that's fit to breathe is not a free ride. Free ride.
Have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Who are these people?
It's us. We're these people.
I love that intro. I love that intro so much.
I'm here with a different co-host this time, Oz LaFave.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me on.
Friend of the show, DJ Joe Nice. How are you, friend?
What's good? And you hear Nick say this all the time. The United States is the most propagandized country in the world.
We are so fucked, you guys. Again, I'm sorry for being cynical, but seriously, we're fucked. We are fucked. We are well and truly fucking fucked.
Just appreciate all the work that you do and the platforms that you all are providing.
Hey, you. Doing good. How are you guys doing?
And as independent media, we have a responsibility to be, we don't hide our bias, obviously, but we must stay true to the facts.
What's up, Pam?
Cheers and salutations. Welcome if you got them.
But I am here with a man that I've been waiting to talk to for the last couple of years, Nico House.
As an educator, what I would suggest is that, first of all, podcasts like these are made.
So you need to be an example for the people and for the future, knowing that your words can actually change the future.
What do you feel? What would Kwame Ture feel we would have to do?
Well, politics is every day of every minute. You have to be aware of what's going on. Not voting on one day, so the vote has never meant anything. So I'm not a Democrat.
See, I would call that guy the Black Obama.
No. The issues that we talk about, listen to us.
As always, kids, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
INN News.
What's up, everybody? It's another episode of INN News. How are you, Care Bear? You doing all right?
INN News. It's the greatest news show. The best. The greatest.
The best news. Very good. People tell me. People tell me, they say, like, anyway.
If they can get a sound clip of that, that would be amazing.
It's Iron and News. I'm Reef Breland, your host. With me, as always, my co-host, Collin Radix-Carter, on another Wednesday.
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
It's okay. They heard the rest.
That was,
yeah.
Yeah, there's a slight echo, I think.
Oh, I got that. It's okay. I know what that is. Play mode. There we go. It's Wednesday.
Oh shit.
Yes.
Here we go again.
We got another episode.
Yeah.
As always, make sure to like, subscribe, share this stream. We can always use the help. If you can give monetarily, we appreciate that too. But you know, otherwise,
times are hard. The holiday season is very much upon us. We know you got to be saving up.
Yep.
For holiday presents for the fam, so whoever. But if you're able to give, and we always say, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, take care of communities first. Any extra money, if you care to give, we always appreciate.
Yep.
And also, please comment. We actually do, well, we don't get many comments to be read, but we do read them. And often, as usually the case on internet, sometimes you guys often have great things to say that actually helps in our thinking of things. Because not to say that, I mean, it's hard. Doing this is hard in just kind of thinking about your own thoughts. Well, in my case, having Reef to kind of share ideas with pretty much all the time. But you guys, when you do comment, when you're serious, you actually have a lot of great things to say that infers our thinking too. So yeah, so do more of that. We appreciate it. And while we're able to
our members
read all of them, you know,
scrolling across the
share
page,
any
on
ideas or any
Patreon.
thoughts. And I think especially with one of the stories that I'm going to be sharing later on tonight, I think that'll be an opportunity for you guys to do that, or at least the way I'm thinking of it, maybe down the road, there'll be ways that you're able to kind of share. So please comment.
Yep.
And we
And again,
appreciate you guys.
We appreciate the members.
But anyway, should we get started?
I think you hear me. I think, right? Just making sure.
Oh no,
Yeah,
it's doing the
thank you.
thing again.
Well, while Collin catches up,
It's doing the thing again.
look
Oh
over
no.
here. Look at the members. We appreciate you being here. You know, we appreciate you giving us monthly appreciation that way. So if you can do that, always helpful. But yeah, Collin, you with us again? Hopefully. You back? Maybe. We'll see. We do have stories tonight whenever Collin catches up. Let's try just moving him and then moving him back. Here and then here. And everyone sees infinite me's for a while. But hopefully Care Bear hears me again.
I hear you now.
Okay, cool. You gotta turn your camera back on.
Oh.
Yeah, that's your
What's
connection,
going
I
on?
think.
This is
The
happening
second
again.
time. And Discord's fun, and decides to do fun things. So I might be able to change. Used to be able to change the region to be better, but I think Discord changed that. But whatever, we'll see. If it happens again, just I'll keep us going. But anyway, you ready to get to our stories?
Yes, let's get to it.
Cool.
So this is a story from MintPress, Epidemic of Coups. So we're going to talk more about West Africa and how, in this case, they're not featured at all in mainstream media, and given a little bit more insight on, you know, actual Africans on their take on what's been happening in West Africa over the last few months in particular, and then the ongoing thing, just looking at history in terms of how colonialism has played a role in the way Africa is now looking at a couple of YouTube clips that I pulled.
Cool.
And then, and actually, I'm actually happy for people who I did post. I did poll people based on our discussion last week if you wanted to, if you wanted me to talk about the child cat spread more. And I mean, it was a small poll. I think I may have gotten about, at least at the time, like 14, 15 people, but most of my followers said yes, want to talk about it more. So, so I did actually find a story regarding that. Not in the way that I want to report on it. So just kind of one of the things that we do talk about is even in independent media, sometimes they get facts not wrong always, but sometimes they don't diverge in sharing the fullness of facts.
Yep. The whole
So we're going to
fullness, the
talk
goodness.
about that, and you're probably wondering why Dr. Cornel West is in the thumbnail. And
You'll
as we
see.
say, it's not to say we won't talk about certain personalities unless they relate to issues. So he's featured in a clip that after, you know, just a whole fiasco with him last week, and then my potential cancelment on YouTube, on Twitter, sorry, over the weekend, over a tweet. Very interesting to hear what he says regarding that in terms of what we now know about him. So yeah, we're going to talk about the child tax credit a little bit more.
Cool.
And what do you have, Reef?
I have some stuff. I have a article by John Kiriakou, lovely portraited here by BigMadCrab. But he wanted to talk about his experience with prison food. We talked about how prison food was manipulated and medicated when we talked about the MK Ultra things. But I figured we should get
is it? I mean, isn't I would argue isn't all of our food prison
yes,
food?
We'll get to that. Yep. Life is a prison, someone says. But yeah, we'll get to that. And I wanted, we've been kind of closing out with Caitlin Johnstone articles here recently, and she's been doing similar articles, I think, you know, trying to help people's mental health. So she wants to talk about how you can find fulfillment in a capitalistic society that makes it very hard to do that. And, you know, it sounds like she's been reading some Alan Watts, and I figured I'd bring some of that to help her out.
Cool.
So we'll get into that. So
actually looking forward. I'm going into that one blind, so it'll be interesting to see what she has to say.
Yep. And I always love listening to Alan Watts. So, you know, even if he is hippy dippy to the fullest extent, but you know, he does some good stuff. So anyway, you ready to go? I'm ready.
I'm ready. Yeah. So our first story of this evening, more Africa stuff, folks, but we can never get enough of Africa since that's kind of my slight bias. And then we don't hear enough of what's going on there. So any information we do get from Africa, I think is always appreciated. But this is from MintPress. This article, come on, is written by
Ramzy Baroud.
Baroud. Do you know what? I forgot what he does exactly.
I think he's do a ton. So,
okay.
But yeah, he's on MintPress fairly often.
Yeah. So this is an opinion piece that he wrote, where he discusses what the media is not telling us about West Africa. I can almost argue what the media is not telling us about anywhere in the global South. I think this also relates.
MintPress, we leave your article. We leave your logo in the top corner. Just saying. You know what I'm
We
saying?
give you credit.
Yeah.
We give you credit whenever you do stuff. Shout out to
Ramzy, if you're
MintPress.
watching, after we tag you, just move that on up the ladder, in case they're wondering. But anyway,
And anyways,
yeah.
And as an aside, there is some French in here, so I have to bust out my
I'll help you out there too.
very awful French that I have not taken since high school.
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi?
So forgive me. So forgive me if I
Parlez-vous français?
mispronounce
Oui.
any of these French words.
Oui.
If I mispronounce any of these French words, forgive me. I've not taken French since senior in high school.
Right.
But anyway, what if the epidemic of coups in West and Central Africa is not that at all, but a direct outcome of outright revolutionary movements, similar to the anti-colonial movements that liberated most African nations from the yoke of Western colonialism throughout the 20th century? Whether this is the case or not, we're unlikely to find out anytime soon, simply because the voices of these African nations are essentially and deliberately muted. For us to understand the real motives behind the spate of military takeovers in West and Central Africa, 8 since 2020, we are sadly compelled to read about it in Western media. And that is a significant part of the problem. Western media has failed to convey the deeper social and economic context behind the political upheaval in various African regions. The near complete control over the narrative, however, is deliberate. In a relatively comprehensive description of Oligui Nguema, the new leader of Gabon, the BBC website offered nothing of substance in terms of familiarizing us with the motives behind the military's move against Gabon's corrupt longtime leader, Ali Bongo. Of course, the voice of Lumumba himself was almost entirely absent in the piece. It's difficult and time-consuming to find a cohesive, non-filtered political discourse emanating from Gabon, or Mali, Burkina Faso, or the rest of the African nations undergoing political transitions now. Instead, we find news, information, and opinions, almost all filtered through Western news agencies, politicians, academics, and experts, quote-unquote. Even those who may appear to speak nonconformist language tend to feed the stereotype, perpetuating the mainstream perception of Africa. A quick examination of the recent articles on West Africa in the French media reveals an obvious truth. The language deconstructing the recent upheaval demonstrates that no true awakening is underway among the French intelligentsia, even by those who perpetually speak as part of the country's mainstream left. In an interview published on August 30th in Le Point, French author and expert in African studies Antoine Glacier blames the French government for failing to see how Africa has gone global. The article appeared shortly after the Gabon coup, but Glacier's ideas are not new. He has made several references in the past to such failure, including an article in L'Opinion early in August. He argues that France has failed to understand the changing political dynamics in and around Africa, and that China, Turkey, and others largely occupy the once tightly French-controlled African markets. But a subtle message is this: Africa evolves, or should always evolve, in France's orbit, and an alternative understanding must be developed by policymakers in Paris to cope with or catch up to the new globalized African politics. The same sense of entitlement was conveyed in Le Figaro. Isabelle Lasserre, in her article entitled Gabon, oh boy,
La diplomate français
La diplomate français discassionné par l'épidémie des coups d'État en Afrique, speaks of bathtub torture of French diplomatics. They barely believe that they can get their heads out of the water when a new pluche, I guess that's how you say it, plunges it back into them even more brutally, she writes. The
Bathtub torture
brutality
sounds like you'd
referred.
pay extra in France for that, but you know, what do I know?
What's that?
Bathtub torture sounds like you'd pay extra for that in France, but you know, what do I know?
Sure.
Um,
The brutality referenced here is not that suffered by African nations in the painful periods of colonialism, post-colonialism, and decolonization, but that of French diplomats. Lasserre references Macron's use of the phrase epidemic of Coups, Coups being another word for coup in German. Not sure if I pronounced that right, but you get the point. It was Macron who popularized the term. It makes Africans appear unruly, sick even. French journalists are now blaming their government for failing to diagnose, let alone remedy, the Pan-African disease. No alternative understanding is possible when the problem is coined in such a way where the blame is squarely on Africans, and the lesser blame of simply failing to understand is placed on France and other Western governments. In Africa, one coup does not drive out another, but adds to the previous one, Lasserre writes. In other words, it is an African-induced chaos, and Europe is suffering and shouldering its consequences, a white man's burden of sorts.
what? Sorry. What?
Little attention has been made to the possibility that perhaps African countries are fed up with the old apparatus, that of Western-supported wealthy and violent dictators and supposed democrats who squandered their country's wealth to remain in power. Gabon is a very rich country in terms of energy resources, lumber, manganese, and iron, but its tiny population of 2.3 million is very poor. This racket of exploitation has been sustained for decades simply because it served the interests of the local rulers and their multinational partners. We're going to get more into that in a few minutes.
Sure.
Whatever means of protest do the people of Gabon, Mali, or others have when mass rallies are violently crushed and the media is tightly controlled, aside, of course, from military coups. This does not seem to be the heart of the matter to many in the French media, primarily concerned about losing their stronghold in Africa to China, Russia, and others. Instead, some in the press are flouting the theory that Africans are impressed with the persona of strongmen of non-democratic regimes, a direct reference to Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
Although the strongman theory has long been discounted, or at least lost its appeal in academic circles, it is often applied in its own form and the ugly insinuations in Western understanding of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. It would make no sense for Africans to reject democracy, one that is based on genuine equality, fair distribution of wealth, ample opportunities, freedom of expression and the press, and all the rest. The only explanation, though often communicated indirectly, is that they all suffered from collective malaise, which complicates the supposed noble mission of Western countries. In truth, many African nations, as demonstrated by the latest popular military takeovers, deeply resent Western governments for the right reasons: their military interventions, economic exploitation, political meddling, and a lingering sense of superiority. Rarely do we hear such alternate views because we are not meant to. The political discourse emanating from West Africa, although largely inaccessible, speaks of a collective desire for a paradigm shift.
Yep.
It is necessary for this fight to go through arms, but also through our values, our behavior, and the recovery of our economy, say Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional president of Burkina Faso, who we've talked about a few weeks ago.
Yep.
In his speech late last year, he declared that the right for total independence has begun. A similar sentiment was campaigned by Assimi Goïta, president of the transition in Mali, when he spoke about the need to regain the nation's dignity in the context of colonial domination. France and other Western countries' experts should fundamentally reconsider their understanding of Africa. They should also diversify their political lexicon to include dignity, values, liberation, and total independence because, clearly, the language of epidemic of coups and other self-serving, convenient phraseology has completely failed.
There's an epidemic of coups. It's contagious somehow that these African countries all hate us right at the same time. It couldn't have anything to do with anything else. Yeah.
Which I mean, it just makes the case why independent media is important.
Yep.
And especially in the global south. So like, we know Nico, shout out to Nico, is in Brazil. And I would argue since he's been in Brazil, he's reported a lot more on international politics since moving there. Friend to the show, Fee, but even when she was in the Convo Couch, has reported quite a bit on issues in Latin America. But I said this, I believe, was it last week, if not 2 weeks ago, it's very hard to try and get sources from Africa that are not necessarily streamlined through Western media.
Mhm.
So
'Cause
that's
we
what
all-
makes it difficult,
we all
even
know,
from my personal to talk about
You have a
stories.
problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
we know this, Colin.
Yes.
So that's what they're saying, is that Africa suddenly is an African if it's not French. What?
Right.
Okay. Nice. I just love the fucking, like, the cojones of, like, Western powers to, like, be this fucking shitty, I mean, it's literally like, you love us, we kill you all the time, but love us. It's so funny. We desperately need all of your resources. Please don't hate us. Not that they
Right.
do anything to actually, like, show their appreciation in any way other than blood and torture and,
So speaking of,
Yeah.
great segue. So
Yeah.
we got a clip from African Stream, one of our favorite people who we've not heard from in a long time.
Yeah, they do some good stuff.
And one of my top interviews, if we can ever get her on the show, Dr. Africana Chimamori Qual. She was the former African Union ambassador to the U.S. We've played her quite a bit last year, and so we're going to play her now. But she's going to explain why. Well, in this case, she's going to explain why, a lot of these African leaders that were placed from our Western bitches, basically,
Yeah.
is directly related to this chronic underdevelopment of the continent that you just spoke of. So again, this is one example of trying to get voices on the ground in terms of what's really happening to kind of counter the Western narrative of what we might hear of Africa if we're lucky to.
Right.
So I'll let her do the talking as to what the reality is.
The performance that you're talking about is the performance of what Nigerian minerals are doing to French education, to French healthcare, to French infrastructure. You tell me, why is it that 95% of Nigerian uranium is powering over 30% of France, while over 70% of Nigerians have no electricity? How is that okay? How is even President Bazoum proud of himself with that fact? There is no development in Niamey. I was in Niamey a few years ago when we had the AU summit. It was pitiful to see the level of underdevelopment that Niger has. There is no development in Niger. Let's make no mistake about it. Niger is the second poorest country in Africa, in the world, in fact. So how can President Bazoum be proud of himself? What development is he talking about? You're talking about developing France? There is no development in Niger. One of the poorest countries on earth. And of course, IMF would love them. World Bank would love them. France would love him because he is allowing the pilferage, the exploitation to continue. And that's why the people are rising up to say, if you can't stand up to the bullies and tell them that the exploitation can no longer continue, and look President Macron in the face and say, President Macron, how is it okay that my money, my bank reserves, my natural resources are funding French education, are funding French healthcare, are funding French infrastructure? How is that okay? President Macron, answer us. Africans in Niger, they want to know. So when you tell me that he is favored by the West, it makes sense. But he's definitely not favored by the people because there is no development. Let's be serious here. Let's stop pushing lies about what's happening. They know the exploitation is happening. It's happening in Niger. It's happening in Burkina Faso. It's happening in Mali. It's happening in every African country. Let's make no mistake about this. We're sick and tired of giving up our lunch to Western nations. African children, they need to eat too. African children need to go to school. African children need good healthcare systems. Behind all that abuse, we need to let the Western world know that there are millions of African children who are going hungry, millions of African children who are dying, millions of women, African women who are dying giving birth to another life, millions of African youth who are unemployed, all because the Western world is continuing with the agenda of exploitation, and exploitation of the African continent. That era is over.
Well,
and we're coming together as Africans and saying, enough is enough. This has got to stop.
Well, Dr. Arikana would be happy to know my mother has told me about all the starving people in Africa for a long time, especially when I wouldn't eat my vegetables. You know?
Shout to Nick in the chat, and shout out to you. He commented, I wasn't aware that all the basics that the French have, early retirement, healthcare, etc., is off the backs of Africans. Yeah, like you can make the argument basically in the global South. And I remember Sabby, shout out to her, and actually the next couple of clips I'm going to play kind of relate to this idea. That this is the danger of democratic socialism that Bernie and AOC and the SCA kind of promote.
Yeah.
It's this idea that like it's still capitalism, but kind of more reined in. But if we're doing well, so let's say if and this is something that I think we don't talk about, that I think we should, for having more socialist programs, like if we want even like Medicare for all and all that kind of stuff, we gotta wonder if we're gonna have this stuff, someone's gonna be exploited. So if it's not necessarily us here, then who is? And often that ends up being places in the global South. So anywhere there is even a hint of capitalism, someone is going to get exploited somewhere else. So that's something that we need to consider more. That Dr. Arikana kind of called out is that the French have healthcare and education off the backs of Africans. And for Africans, it's not even guaranteed that they get any of those things themselves. So just something I think when we do talk about these conversations, we often don't think about the idea of like, there's still this air of capitalism, even for the things here that we talk about that's more progressive, that is still exploiting somewhere else.
Those resources are from somewhere.
Right. So, but given that, so I'm going to play two clips. I know Sabby and JB have referenced this YouTube channel before, but this is Second Thought.
Yep.
So I'm actually going to play in two parts because it's long. It's about a 20-minute long video. But I'm going to split into two clips where this guy basically talks about, I'm not sure of his name actually, but he's going to talk about how capitalism robs the developing world. So he talks about parts of it in relation to Africa, like Atlantic slave trade, essentially, and given how it is now and how it kind of affects within the global South as a whole. So let's play. I forgot actually. This one is probably the shorter one of the two. So let's play this clip first.
A little bit. Our modern world order and its rich-poor divide is undeniably rooted in the history of slavery and colonialism. While the history of the world is long and diverse, with each area and culture having its own record of the sequence of important events that defines it, a common historical juncture for many places is the white guy showing up and ruining it. That's the case for basically every modern country that's not here, and practically entire continents like Africa. which, despite its incredible diversity of cultures and characteristics, has been pretty uniformly subjected to the violence and damaging effects of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Before the arrival of the Europeans, Africa was a continent with tens of thousands of cultures, some organized in ways that are easily recognizable to modern Western eyes with empire or state-like structures, and others that operated on completely different societal models without a good Western analogy. While the conventional narrative about Africa is one of a backwards continent that was quote-unquote civilized by European colonialism, a horrible and flat-out wrong justification for the atrocities I'll get to in a bit, Africa was actually developing side by side with much of the rest of the world for centuries. Historians note, for example, the advanced agricultural techniques like terracing, crop rotation, green manuring, mixed farming, and regulated swamp farming that made African topsoil rich and fertile for centuries, and the domestication of plants like millet, rice, and yams that was widespread on the continent. While this agriculture was not as productive as that in Europe and Asia, this was probably because land was abundant, and the organization of production around family units instead of feudal lords meant that self-sufficiency didn't require the same maximization that we saw in Europe, which ironically eventually led to the degradation of European soil, where Africa had achieved a more sustainable model. Then there were material goods. While Europe's Industrial Revolution had brought with it an abundance of goods, mass-produced in shiny new factories, especially textiles, African goods like leather, copper, iron, and cloth produced at the same time were praised for their craftsmanship, their durability, and their quality. This is not to say that because it was happening at a smaller scale that Africa did not experience abundance. Like Europe, Africa produced surplus, and used this surplus to trade, with complex economies emerging between the three continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa prior to the advent of slavery and colonialism. What I'm trying to say here is that while there were qualitative differences between the countries that are now considered the Global North and the Global South, it's not always clear that these differences made the Global South worse off.
Right. So, for all intents and purposes, and you probably know this anyway if you know your history, like pre colonialism, Global South generally, they were doing pretty well. Just different, but it made sense given their climate and cultures, So, okay, so now we're going to go to the next part, the longer part. And as I said, there's a lot that we're cutting out here, but this part I think is just more important in terms of how capitalism has basically has gotten Africa to where it is now, and by association, the Global South. So you can go ahead with this one, Reef.
Colonies were often very profitable. According to historian Walter Rodney, in the mid-1950s, British investments in South Africa were estimated at £860 million and yielded a stable profit of 15%, or £129 million every year. Similarly, De Beers Consolidated Mines made a profit that was both phenomenal and consistently high, between $26 million and $29 million throughout the 1950s. In other words, if slavery hadn't driven a big enough wedge between the rich and the poor, colonialism would. But colonialism would eventually end. That is, if you don't count the 17 official colonies still recognized by the UN, like Guam and French Polynesia, or the many more colonies that don't get put on official lists because they make ruling countries uncomfortable. Nonetheless, we have a lot fewer colonies today than we used to. The mid-20th century was a period of success for a number of anti-colonial revolutions. Many countries won their right to independence in these revolutions, and to most, this is where the story ends. It seems like the domination of colonial powers is over. Yeah, Europe screwed over the rest of the world for centuries, but then they stopped. So then, why is there still a gap between rich and poor? Can't all these countries just pull themselves up by their bootstraps? No, it's not just that after years of colonialism and slavery, the West had a head start and the Global South had a handicap. When it was forced to relinquish the direct control of colonial rule, the West made sure it would never have to let go of the economic power it had built for centuries. In other words, the formal end of colonialism wasn't really the end after all. Like credits after a Marvel movie, there was more to come. Within a global capitalist economy, burgeoning independent economies were in a tough spot. After decades of being used and exploited, former colonies had very little wealth still in their control. But they needed to trade with the countries that had formerly exploited them for trillions and never paid reparations back. Trade is how most countries can secure basic needs. Enter the IMF, the World Bank, and structural adjustment programs. The IMF, World Bank, GATT, which became the WTO, and even some Western countries directly told newly independent countries that if they wanted to be included in the international economy, and perhaps even get a loan to get them started, they would have to follow a strict set of rules. They would have to drop any tariffs on foreign goods, privatize any national industry, open their country to foreign investment, and in every respect minimize the role of the state. In some
Which is why BRICS has been becoming a thing among African countries. So
Right, but even that is kind of concerning considering that they're trying to model themselves after a lot of these
the
stuff
IMF, right?
And the
Granted,
World
it's
Bank.
way better and gives them way more power in regards to like voting rights, but than the IMF certainly does, which is pretty much all
Right.
U.S. Western decision making.
Right.
with BRICS, it's at least
But
like, hey, you get a say, like if you're part of it.
Right.
So,
But given like what we talked about with India, how certain
Yep.
countries have 1 foot in and 1 foot to the west,
Yep. That
you
might be
know, that's still
tricky.
that still might be concerning. Even with
Some,
that,
they had to
so
open the doors to unbridled Western capitalism, with pretty awful results. Not only were the loans really for the benefit of Western organizations, a loan has to be paid back with interest after all, the rest of the requirements often had and continue to have devastating effects. These measures ended up inviting many foreign-owned companies into former colonies. Without the ability to level the playing field on international competition with protectionist tariffs, or large-scale investments into national industries, infrastructure, and common goods, Global South countries were taken over by multinational industries. In the forced competition for shrinking export markets that the liberalization of trade produced, the Global South was coerced into turning to Western companies and their direct capture of national resources. Today, as an example, Canadian companies operate 75% of the world's mining companies, many of which are located in Africa and in Latin America. In effect, resources that are located in the Global South and extracted by the workers of the Global South were forcibly opened up to, and ultimately produce profit for, Canadian business interests, not for these exploited countries. This is why the Global South is still so poor. Because it's not just Canada. In just about every country in the Global South, in almost every economic sector, unprocessed natural resources leave the country's borders, extracted by low-wage workers. They're then processed in the Global North into manufactured products, which in turn are sold back at a higher price to meet the Global South's basic needs. Resources and profits go out, expensive goods and foreign companies come in. Colonialism by the state has been largely recycled into colonialism by businesses and their friendly international institutions. One 27-year-old Cuban lawyer described how this process worked out in Cuba in the 1950s. A country that was no longer a colony of either Spain or the US, but still very much felt like it was. 85% of the small farmers in Cuba pay rent and live under the constant threat of being dispossessed from the land that they cultivate. More than half of the best cultivated land belongs to foreigners. In Oriente, the largest province, the lands of the United Fruit Company and West Indian Company join the north coast to the southern one. There are 200,000 peasant families who do not have a single acre of land to cultivate to provide food for their starving children. We export sugar to import candy. We export hides to import shoes. We export iron to import plows. In short, what the structural adjustment programs and the international capitalist economy offered the Global South was predatory inclusion. Exclusion from international trade could have been deadly to these countries impoverished by centuries of extraction, violence, and exploitation, so even a deal that sucked and pulled profits to the Global North was often sold as better than the alternative. While some of these programs have been accompanied by economic growth in the Global South, it is a much smaller growth than reflects the work done by poor countries, since most of the profit leaves for the North. And what growth does stay domestic mainly falls into the hands of the Global South's wealthy who willingly collaborate with foreign companies for a cut of the profit. Today, these practices continue in full swing. Colonialism never really went away. In summary, the poverty of the world today is not an accident. It's the product of centuries of subjugation to imperialist forces, at the root of which was the need for capitalism to expand beyond the borders of Europe, and the means to inflict tremendous violence on the poor. That this system continues today is no accident. It's what makes the rich and powerful more money. As long as there is no economic challenger strong enough to end this system, capitalism will continue to rob the poor for the benefit of the wealthy.
Yep. Makes sense to me.
Shout out to Second Thought for that. But yeah, so as I said, we're talking about Africa, but I mean, that's the information that you're not going to necessarily hear. You know, it's still poor given it's colonialism, as he said, through business versus, you know, like back in the day, slavery. And again, he mentioned that, but I cut that out for time, and most of us know that history anyway. So, but yeah, so, but I do think, though, that's something we definitely need to kind of talk about, I think, more on the left, is how we can make a lot of our, if we're thinking more progressively in terms of having policies that really are more socialistic in tone, how are we able to make it stand for themselves without the idea of having to exploit others in order for us to gain those benefits?
Which I do see that conversation happening among Eastern powers for sure. But, you know, they seem to be the only ones wanting to communicate that. So, compared to Western powers, European powers who just are like, shut up and let us exploit you. You know? So,
and we benefit off of your suffering.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think I think that's definitely something.
Well,
I think moving forward that we don't consider that at all, and I think really on the left generally, I think I think that's just due to our culture, that we're just so isolated from the rest of the world. We tend not to think about these things. We don't think about, where we get our food or where we get our clothes. We just see it and not consider the labor and the exploitation that does happen over many of the things that we have in our homes right now.
Yeah.
But I think if we want to be serious about, if we wanted to have these policies like Medicare for All and like a living wage and all of that, we got to think about the idea of like, how can we make sure that like in Africa, especially in West Africa, that they're able to develop in the way that they should, that is truly democratic.
Well, if you're watching the clip, join that conversation in the comments below. Let us know what you think. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this video if you're there, But yeah. You ready for the next one, Care Bear?
I am ready.
Cool, let's do this. Here, let's take it out of 1920s mode. It's John Kiriakou, everybody. Everyone's favorite CIA whistleblower. He went to jail for whistleblowing. Don't know if you know that story. If you don't, you can go watch the episode he was on with Tar Reed on the Politics of Survival right here on this channel. Should be a playlist for that. He wrote this article September 18th over in Consortium, another lovely publication. But he writes, animal grade poison food indicts U.S. society. Prisoners in the U.S. face chronic hunger and illness due to substandard and disgusting food as new Bureau of Prisons Director Colette Peters reportedly battles bureaucracy to reform the system. So, John's written in the past about an awful experience he had in prison a decade ago while serving 23 months in prison after blowing the whistle on the CIA's torture program. I was doing my time at the Federal Correctional Institute at Loretto, Pennsylvania, a low-security prison in the Appalachian Mountains. One of the very first things I found on my first day was that the food was bad. Very bad. I arrived in prison on a Thursday. The next day, Friday, was, quote, fish day. A fellow prisoner warned me to skip the fish. We call it sewer trout, he said. You don't want to put that in your body. Sure enough, when I got in line in the cafeteria, I saw boxes stacked behind the servers. Every box was very clearly marked Alaskan cod, product of China, not for human consumption, feed use only. that face is pretty good.
Feed. As in what you give to pigs.
Yes, or animals, right. So yeah. That's what the servers were slopping onto our trays.
Oh god.
Things only got worse from there. I won't go into detail about the rat that drowned in the Kool-Aid dispenser. Oh no. I suppose things like that. Yeah.
I mean, I live in DC. I see plenty of rats. That doesn't seem so far-fetched.
Yeah, like that's normal. Like that's a good death for the rat. He's like, fuck yeah, sugar death. Yes. I suppose things like this will happen from time to time, but what incident still makes me angry 10 years later? Every Wednesday evening was taco night. This disgusting concoction was ground beef, some sort of sauce, and a little onion. It was truly inedible, and I threw it away more often than I ate it. One day, guards posted a memo from the warden in every housing unit saying, sorry, through no mistake of our own, the company that sends us the ground beef for tacos accidentally mismarked a shipment of dog food as ground beef. That dog food was served to inmates. The Bureau of Prisons will fine the company. Okay? I later read in Prison Legal News magazine that the company was fined and the BOP kept the money. But the real shame here isn't even that we ate dog food. The real shame is that we didn't even realize that it was dog food because the food is so bad every day. I can't tell you how many expired foods we were served still in the packaging and how many year-old frozen bagels dyed green for some previous St. Patrick's Day we were served every Sunday for a year. A new study by Impact Justice has found that this level of food quality is consistent in federal, state, and local prisons across America, the report says. That, like every other aspect of life in prison, the food is dreary and monotonous and, with rare exceptions, relentlessly bad. 2 slimy pieces of bologna sandwiched between flimsy slices of white bread, a packet of mustard, and a handful of potato chips one day, 2 boiled hot dogs, the same white bread, and a scoop of underbaked beans the next. These are concoctions too similar to differentiate.
How can you
Underbaked beans when they're dry, like when you take dry beans and then don't cook them long enough.
You typically put them in, but they're typically in the can. Well, I would imagine in prisons they're getting them in the can.
Maybe.
So
it might be cheaper to do dry and then, not spend the time to cook them long enough. I don't know. These are concoctions too similar to differentiate, in which chunks of mystery meat swim in a dull gravy, sometimes atop mushy white rice, or a clump of pasta with the same watery tomato sauce week after week. In 2019, prisoners in Nevada complained to state officials that the food they were being served was unhealthy, of poor quality, highly processed, and too high in fat and sodium. The state's response was to cut portion sizes. Fuck, you don't like it, you're not gonna get it. That's what, fuck you. Oh, God. Anyway, last week, with prisoners quite literally starving from the meager portions, a local newspaper reported that many prisoners were eating toothpaste, salt, and even wet toilet paper to try to starve off the hunger. Bro, just start cooking those boots. Like, do something. Like, a former prisoner told the paper when he was released from a Nevada minimum security work camp that a doctor told him that his legs and feet were swollen because of the poor diet that he had for the 6 years that he was imprisoned. What he was given may have met standards for nutrition, but maybe the problem is with the state standards. You think?
No, I can vouch for this.
Yeah.
Working in, now, for those of you who know me, once upon a time, I used to work for the Salvation Army. I was the director of a homeless daycare center. So we would feed these kids were homeless. So we fed them, while they were with us at the daycare. And the gag that I always found funny was that ketchup was considered a fruit.
Yeah.
This is a federal standard, I believe.
Right.
At least definitely with the state. Ketchup was considered a fruit.
Like, not as in it's made from a fruit, but like it is a fruit.
That counted as a survey.
Yes, a fruit. Yeah,
so
stupid shit. Yep.
So you can get away with giving the kids like
nothing,
hamburgers and fries every single day if you really wanted to, as long as they had ketchup on the side.
That makes sense. Okay. So, when the newspaper first brought the issue to public attention last week, a spokesman for the Nevada State Department of Corrections said, "There's a diet, excuse me, it may not be what we want, but a dietitian reviews is saying that it's the vitamins and requirements at a minimum that you need. I wonder if he knows about the dog food or the Chinese Alaskan cod animal feed. I wonder if his legs and feet are swollen or if he's malnourished. I had occasion last week to have dinner with another former federal prisoner. He said that he had tweeted so regularly about the poor conditions in American prisons that the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the BOP, finally asked him to come on as a paid advisor. One of the first issues he raised was that of food quality. He told me that the new director of the BOP, Colette Peters, genuinely wanted to do the right thing. Yeah, sounds like it. I'll see it when I believe it. He said her tenure as head of the Oregon Department of Corrections was successful and that she implemented positive changes there. But he went on to say, I like how there's a but, that Peters is up against an entrenched bureaucracy at the BOP. It's a bureaucracy that sees her as an outsider, trying to push career BOP officials aside. They're doing whatever they can to block her reforms, waiting until she finally resigns or is fired so they can go back to business as usual. What does that sound like, Care Bear? That sounds real familiar. You know, if only we can reform things from the inside. Maybe that's what it sounds like.
Or as a normal day, it's politics 101.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep. Controlled op, all that fun stuff. So that means that the rest of us have to keep up the fight. Outrage is motivating. We shouldn't be proud that prison food in some of the worst countries in the world is better than what we have here. We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, right? We have to fight it. Either Mahatma Gandhi or former President Hubert Humphrey, depending on what source you use, said the measure of a society is how it treats its weakest members. The prison system and prison food certainly indict our society. So,
can I also add?
Yes, please.
Because I was thinking this
the
whole time.
Yep.
Kids.
Yes.
School lunches.
Yes.
Same shit. You can't tell me that what some of these kids eat for school lunch isn't comparable to what you will get in a prison. You cannot tell me that.
If not
it's
worse.
Probably just as bad, honestly. Maybe slightly better because they're kids, but the food, and look, I grew up on school. Actually, you know what? Like I remember when I was in the UK, when I grew up in the UK for elementary school, I remember those cook moms. Like every day they were at the canteen. Like they actually cooked the food every single day. Like nothing was processed. We didn't get anything like in styrofoam tray or whatever. Everything was cooked. Now, granted, at the time, it wasn't that great, but at least it was cooked fresh pretty much every day when we were in school. So like, and the fact that I came, and this was like for me in the 80s. So the fact that coming from that to like not preschool, middle school in the 90s, where it became more of the standard like stereotypical school lunch that we kind of show here. Yeah, I just, you cannot tell me that prison food and school lunches don't go hand in hand, because often not, they're the same companies that are providing both anyway. So, but yeah, like immediately my heart was school lunches are the same shit.
Well, and you know, we mentioned at the top of the show, you know, this is indicative of the growing problem of food in the country, let alone in these specific use cases.
Right.
You know, with food deserts
Right.
being an inordinate thing, like, you know, how many people have access to good food, let alone food? You know,
Right.
so that probably pushes them to do things that end them in prison where they get even worse food. So,
right.
You know, it's wild, you know, especially when you talk about all the modified crap, all the poison they just leave in the food. I mean, how many go look up what you can and can't feed your baby. Just go look up those lists of how all the toxic metals and crap is in everything. You know?
Right.
Like,
That's part of the reason why my dad lives in Barbados for the good chunk of the year now because like he's always and my dad has been dealing with cancer for the last 30 years now. So like his thing is, yeah, obviously wanting to maintain his health as long as he can, but he basically says, I know like in Barbados that everything is fresh. Everything typically, I can get if he doesn't grow it himself, but like usually it comes from the land. I know where it comes from. I know it doesn't have this extra shit that is going to make him sick. And actually a lot of that, he kind of argues it's probably what got him to have cancer in the first place.
Right.
So compared to the UK, now you can argue in Europe, it's somewhat better because there are certain chemicals that you are not allowed to, there's certain adjectives that are illegal in Europe compared to here. But yeah, you're right. It's not by much.
I
where
literally saw a thing yesterday about like British prisoners being like, I'm Muslim so that I can get like halal meals. Right? Until Ramadan comes up and then they starve them all because like, you're supposed to fast. So, but yeah, it's, hopefully I've seen a ton of prisoner unions are a thing. Like family members of prisoners unionizing are things. I mean, get on it, and like, if you have members that are locked up, you might, help them out, send them some food, something, like we're not meant to be poisoning our indicted. We're meant to be rehabilitating, but what do I know? So
well, that's the thing. It's like we don't think of it that way.
No, it's
we don't think of it that way. It's,
in and of itself.
It's punishment. So it's just like but it's like okay, but as I said, children eat this similar shit.
Yeah.
So what does that say about our society that you're willing to give something similar to our
Good
children?
brain food, Alaskan Alaskan Chinese cod animal feed. That's
well, granted, it's not that extreme, but you still can argue the quality is still not that great.
Yeah.
In terms of, even for school lunches at least on the federal level, in this country. So yeah. It's just bad all around. Like our food culture here sucks all around generally. And we don't honor the least of these or anybody in terms of like good nutrition. Like you essentially have to pay a lot of money in order to hopefully try to not put all those adjectives and chemicals in your body that can essentially make you sick.
Well, if you're watching this as a clip, let us know if you had any experiences with food in prison. Put them in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff.
As I said, I've only had school lunch.
Yep.
So
that's just as bad.
That's the closest I will get.
Put that experience down below. That food fight you had in like 4th grade. Talk about that. But anyway, you brought this.
Yeah. So this is kind of a continuation of what we talked about last week. I did mention that as part of my advocacy for teachers, as part of my teacher advocacy group in DC, we have a bill here where they want to offer, like, put a district child tax credit in the books. So right now, I am going to be starting the process of, collecting data for that, and so we could start, advocating for this. And then I did ask you guys last week, and actually, out of that, there was some good conversations in the chat that I asked. Come on. That I asked, should I report on the child tax credit on 9N News this week? And again, 14 votes, but I think 13 of you basically said, yes, you should. So, so there was a story that I did see in Common Dreams that is talking about the child tax credit on the federal level. Case in point, our vice president Kamala Harris tweeted a few days ago, "No child should grow up in poverty. That's why President Joe Biden and I will continue fighting to restore the expanded child tax credit to give millions of families the tax relief and breathing room they deserve." It's election season, folks.
Do not come.
What?
I'm sure we could get another clip of Kamala saying something else other than that,
I'm
though.
sure, but what else do you need to listen to her about, you know?
Yeah. So, yes, Dr. Nick, the child tax credit did end. But there's possible talks about restoring it.
Okay.
Again, it's election season. So
Oh, I get it. Okay.
what?
No, it's just that we gotta put it in for a while so that it helps like 5% of people, and then take it away, and then election comes up. So hey, remember that thing we took away? Like, we'll give it back to you if you vote for us. Like, okay.
Well, here's the issue. Well, you kind of spoke into that. You kind of spoke into my point a little bit.
Yeah.
So this article that I found that actually inspired me in light of our conversation, I was like, I want to talk about this a little bit more in depth. This is Jake Johnson. He's often hit or miss.
Not to be confused with Jack
This
Johnson.
one's a miss.
Of banana.
And just reading the title can tell you all why it's a miss. So he writes, U.S. child poverty rate more than doubled in 2022. Thanks to who?
Manchin and GOP. Yeah, no, it's also Democrats but yes.
Right.
Didn't we just have a ton of papers and stuff telling us that like they halved child poverty rate? Isn't that?
Oh, we're gonna get all into that.
Okay.
So I know for a lot of you, we probably talked about this at some point, but we're gonna make this rehash again because I think I believe this will be a possible tactic for Democrats to try and woo people to vote for them come next year in terms of the child tax credit. But have an issue with Jake Johnson with the framing in terms of saying that Manchin is to blame and the GOP is to blame. Definitely not them, just them. So this is going to be one example of even independent media can not do such a good job. So I am going to rip into Jake a little bit, and I'm also going to rip someone else into this a little bit as well. You could probably figure out from the thumbnail who that is. I'll show you why later. No. But anyway, Jake writes, Joe Manchin's legacy includes artificially manufacturing child poverty for no reason other than his callous disregard for human beings, said the debt collective following the release of new census data. Oh, God. Anyway. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and congressional Republicans faced fresh backlash on Tuesday after the U.S. Census Bureau released new data showing that the nation's child care poverty rate more than doubled last year compared to the previous year, thanks in large part to the expiration of the boosted child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit, an American Rescue Plan policy that sent eligible families up to $300 per month for each child, and eliminated the original CTC's regressive phase-in, helped push the U.S. child poverty rate to a record low of 5.2 in 2021. But the program expired at the end of that year after Manchin, who supported the ARP, opposed an extension, basically claiming that some parents would use the money on drugs instead of their children. Survey data showed that most families, including those in West Virginia, use the money to buy food and help with rent, along with other essentials. Joe Manchin's legacy includes artificially manufacturing child poverty for no reason other than his callous disregard for human beings, the Debt Collective wrote on social media. Congressional Republicans who unanimously opposed the ARP also rejected calls to support an extension of the boosted CTC, part of a broader pandemic-era safety net that is now collapsing. The result of the program's expiration, as predicted, was a devastating surge in child poverty. According to the new Census Bureau data, the child poverty rate rose from 12.4 in 2022, the largest single-year increase on record. The overall U.S. poverty rate also increased, rising from 7.8 in 2021 to 12.4 last year. More than 37 million people in the U.S. lived in poverty in 2022, the Census Bureau said. Today's sudden rise in poverty is the direct result of policy choices, including Congress' decision to allow the successful child tax credit expansion to expire, said Sharon Parrott, president of the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities. Policymakers should expand the child tax credit this year and reverse this troubling trend. If Congress had kept the expanded CTC in place last year, Parrott noted, 3 million additional kids would have been kept out of poverty, preventing more than half of the 5.2 million increase in the number of children in poverty last year. The child poverty rate would have been about 8.4 rather than 12.4, Parrott said. I mean, I have thoughts. I'll keep going though for now. Hi, puppy. Ellis Good and Ishmael Sid Martinez of the Economy Policy Institute echoed Parrott's assessment, saying in a statement that if policymakers were willing to maintain the pandemic-era CTC expansions, a much smaller share of children will be living in poverty. More ambitious but economically sustainable expansions for our generally stingy welfare state could essentially eliminate poverty completely, they added. We know this vision isn't politically realistic in the short run, but policy lessons of 2020 and 2021 should not be lost with today's report. In his response to new data, President Joe Biden placed the blame on the child poverty increase entirely on Republican lawmakers, not mentioning that Manchin's opposition was ultimately decisive in the evenly divided Senate in 2021. So, uh-oh.
What? Oh, you probably
I froze again.
Weird. Why you freeze?
I froze.
Why you freeze? Unfreeze. You're not frozone. Do I have to move you again? Weird. Weird Discord. Bip. Bip. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I froze again. So, where did I get cut off?
Yeah, no, you were good. We heard you the whole time. That's what's crazy. So, weirdly enough, you freeze again? You there? Collin?
Froze again.
There it goes. We hear you. We can hear you the whole time. That's what's crazy.
So you can hear me, but it just freezes on my end. I'm not sure why.
I don't know.
And then I can't hear you.
For the hours we're in Discord normally, just when we're recording. How crazy is that?
I don't know.
Anyway,
what were you saying? You were saying something.
I was so. Correct me if I'm wrong. This sounds like something similar to, like the student debt, like moratorium and the eviction moratorium, where it's like, we're going to put these things in place without actual anchors that actually make sure that they stay, because we know the opposition is going to get rid of them, you know, and then come election season, we can use it to like bludgeon people to vote for us, to shame people. And
right.
Okay.
Right.
You won't go outside.
So yeah,
Outside.
yeah.
Okay.
Does Puppy agree?
Yes, probably. He's more important about the squirrels that are in her yard. Come on.
Yeah. So anyway, today's census report shows the dire consequences of congressional Republicans' refusal to extend the enhanced child tax credit, even as they advance costly corporate tax cuts, Biden said. We cut child poverty in nearly half to record lows for all children in this nation, largely by expanding the child tax credit. Hold on to that sentence. Okay? Keep that in mind.
Holding it.
Last year, congressional Republicans insisted on raising taxes on families with children. The rise reported today in child poverty is no accident. It is a result of a deliberate policy choice congressional Republicans made to block help for families with children while advancing massive tax cuts for the wealthiest and largest corporations. No mention of your boy Manchin, who blocked the bill and made a big stink about it. See, this is why, like, no one should take.
Yep.
I can't. Like, I just can't because it. And people say Republicans are the lesser, like the greater evil here, like, because even the shittiest of shitless will acknowledge that Joe Manchin is shit. And if he really was that bad, or if he really was that callous, like, Biden should remove him from any leadership position that he currently has in Congress. He has not done it. Right?
Yep.
So, so that basically just shows that he's just, he's a rotating villain, as we say in the space. So, anyway, shortly after the Census Bureau published its data, Senator reporter Joseph Zebelos-Roig asked Manchin whether he's had second thoughts about opposing an extension of the child tax credit boost now that its expiration has reduced a record increase in child poverty. I'm sure, and we know what he's going to say. It's deeper than that. We all have to do our part, Manchin replied. The federal government can run everything. What does that mean? Well, I don't want to know what.
Yeah, that's Manchin. The federal government can't run everything. No, he's trying to say it's communism to give, like, kids, like, to help people is communism. We can't. Government can't run everything. Like, well, it could if it wanted to.
He's right in a sense. It is deeper than that, and we'll get more into that in a few minutes. So he's right there. Well, in my interpretations, he's right there. Like, but yeah, I think, as you said, he's going to associate that with socialism. So
Yes.
yeah. The West Virginia senator said he had yet to see the new poverty figures. Senator John Fetterman said in a statement that the new census data is just completely heartbreaking and deeply disappointing.
Which
It's
Fetterman
also a
clone said
Pacific.
that? Is that the second clone or the third clone?
Who knows? It's also a Pacific choice, Fetterman added. A spike in child poverty like this didn't need to happen. Congress had the chance to extend these programs that would keep our children fed and boost working families out of poverty. But it didn't. It's shameful. In the richest country in the world, no child should have to go through this. And now it's on us to fix this problem that shouldn't have been created in the first place. All right. So remember what all that we had to say. So as I said, you already kind of showed that Manchin isn't the problem here, right?
Sure.
So now we're gonna go to RBN for a minute. Now I'm gonna say this with full transparency. I know that Dr. West has gone on RBN to kind of talk to him about his campaign. I have not watched any of them really. Maybe like a couple of minutes here and there, but nothing substantial. So I was actually looking for something else because I know, shout out to Nick, I know he's talked about the child tax credit before. This is one of the clips I found that they talked about this recently. I think this clip that we're going to show was in the last 2 months. What I found interesting was the conversation that Nick and CJ were having with Dr. West in terms of the child tax credit in light of very recent events.
Yeah.
So let's play it and we'll see what I'm talking about. And I probably might ask you to pause at some point, but here we go.
Action.
And I want to talk about the Democratic Party and cutting child poverty. Because to me, cutting child poverty, this idea is a capitalist smoke and mirrors. Because how can you cut child poverty without cutting the parents' poverty? That's, to me, is absurd on its face. Is that...
Pause there.
I mean, it's like...
So basically, look, I'm not knocking the child tax credit at all. I think it's a worthwhile thing. But why are we talking about helping the children without helping the parents?
Yeah.
Like, you can't talk like... And that was something that... Right. How about just end poverty, period, for everybody? Right? Not just the kids. Like, you're going to give the kids money while the parents are suffering? That makes no sense. But somehow that's almost accepted because they're kids, that we have to help the kids and not help the parents who are trying to raise their kids. So yeah, and just even with like Fetterman and all of these goons are basically kind of implicating this idea. It's like, oh, we have to help the kids. What about the parents?
Yeah.
So let's keep going.
What about the 10%?
And I give this, it's funny, I give this analogy all the time. It's like, so I show up to a parent who's in poverty, their house looks like poverty, and then when I go in the kids' room, it's like steaks and big screen TVs. Is that what's happening? It's not. It's like,
that's right.
So
I've
it's
actually seen
absurd
that
to
before.
believe,
Sure.
in my opinion, that there is even a possibility of cutting child poverty when they live with parents who are in poverty. That just, to me, logically doesn't make sense. And let me play the video now, let you comment.
I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful thing. Pandemic and the relief bill.
Want.
I give Biden credit. He cut
Go
child
back. Go back.
Go back.
Go back 5 seconds. Please go back 5 seconds. You caught what he said?
Parent who's in poverty, their house looks like poverty, and then when I go in the kids' room, it's like steaks and big screen TVs. Is that what's happening? It's not. It's like,
that's right.
So it's absurd to believe, in my opinion, that there is even a possibility of cutting child poverty when they live with parents who are in poverty. That just, to me, logically doesn't make sense. And let me play the video now, let you comment.
I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful.
What did he say?
What?
Yes. Crab. Yes, he did.
What?
Keep going.
Beautiful thing. Pandemic and the relief bill. I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. It's a beautiful thing.
Said it again.
And that, and I must say,
stop there. I give Biden credit. He cut child poverty in half. Look, I did not intend to play this at all. Just being totally transparent. I was looking for another clip that Nick did on a child tax credit that I couldn't find, and I stumbled upon this. But I think it's very telling. Again, this was an interview 2 months ago. That here Cornel West is, and again, it's especially like in light of what happened with me last week, and especially with the Peter Dow fiasco last week, and people were calling Dr. West out, and basically everyone was kind of like, shut the fuck up, like, we're going to support West. Here he is right here, basically essentially saying, I'm giving Biden credit.
You don't have to do.
For it. You should. No,
even
not
in that stage,
don't
he
have
didn't
to.
do any of
Shouldn't.
that.
Shouldn't.
Right.
Shouldn't.
Yeah.
Shouldn't give him any credit. Because it didn't. Well, we'll get more into that. But you're trying to run against him and Trump. Why in the fuck would you want to give him credit for something like that?
What voter is that going to get you? But
like, I feel like essentially the PMCs who are just standing with both parties. And I said that, and I'll say it again. So really, Gamer, I agree. He's been in PMC classes for far too long. And guys, don't forget, like, Dr. West didn't grow up poor. Like, he grew up middle class. Yeah, obviously he had to deal with a lot given that he's black, but he grew up with some privilege. And I think especially given that he went to Harvard and Princeton and is taught at Harvard and Princeton, you know, he's had some privilege. So the fact that he was able to say to Nick and CJ that he's basically complimenting Biden here for doing a crumb, essentially a crumb.
Right.
You know, and it kind of right, and it's kind of pissing me off because he's a theologian. Like, the idea that he acknowledged that Biden did something good when, as essentially a person whose works in faith in God, you should be demanding for more social justice. You should be demanding of eliminating poverty, not just for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I wrong not to think that?
Yeah.
Like, why not push for more? So, yeah, I just found it very surprising. Again, this was a surprise to me. I just happened to find this clip, but then listening to it, I was just kind of like, what the hell? Like, and I'm frozen again.
You're frozen
Probably because
again.
I spoke against so much.
Yeah, we heard you though, so hopefully you hear us. If not, I might have to move you again.
I'm frozen.
Okay. This did this last week too, but not as bad. It didn't do this as bad last week.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's with Discord, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Anyway,
I'll continue.
But yeah, let's keep going.
Hey, Dr. West, this was the most asked question from our last time you were on here when they heard you say that, and we weren't able. Time-wise, I wasn't able to get. Yeah, I wasn't able to get in and ask you to clarify what you meant. But this was the number one thing that was asked. It was like, what is he talking about? That's not a thing. Cutting child poverty. So, what everything I said? Do you want to? Can you speak to that, or what do you mean, or further give further details about what you're thinking on cutting child poverty without cutting parent poverty?
Right. I mean, one is that it raises questions about the categories that we use. Can we use a category of child poverty that in some way is separated from the poverty of the parents themselves? Now, social scientists do have different ways of measuring this. Oftentimes they're very arbitrary and unconvincing, but they do have ways of measuring it. Marion Wright Edelman, as you know, Children's Defense Fund, the whole project was around child poverty. It was not so much around the poverty of the parents. And the child poverty was always higher. Child poverty, 23%. That's parents using 18% for Black folks, 39% for children. They say for everyday Black folk who are adults, it's around 21%. So it's always much higher. So they must have some indices or criteria that allows them to make these different kinds of claims. Yeah, so then when they had the relief bill and they gave the money directly to the parents for use for children, right? Within those few months, the child poverty did go down. They didn't measure so much the parents' poverty, but the child poverty did go down because they had billions and billions of dollars that went directly into the homes. so that food security would be able to be addressed more effectively. And that happened during that bill. Then they allowed the bill to expire. So it was clear they had no fundamental commitment. That's the end of that particular dialogue that I had with Sister Savvy, right? That it was clear they had no commitment to trying to alleviate child poverty, but they happened to cut it in half. And that was something that people were talking.
So they had no commitment. They had no commitment. Yeah, I pressed spacebar on accident.
Okay.
They had no commitment, but yet they did it. Now you're finding out that no commitment part, like, is coming up, you know? So
it did go down because they had billions and billions of dollars and went 18% for black folks, 39%. Right. I mean, one is that it raises questions about being unconvincing, but they do have ways of measuring it. Marion right the criteria that allows them to make these different kinds of claims. So then when they had the relief bill and they gave the money directly to the parents, that it was clear they had no commitment to trying to alleviate child poverty, but they happened to cut it in half. And that was something that people were talking about statistically, empirically, social scientists and others. That's what I had in mind.
Yeah, I was one of the people. I was going to say, I was one of the people that received the check. I was one of the people that received these cut. So I'm basically just saying, I'll give it to you, Nick. I'm basically saying, even these social scientists that come up with these ideas are living in a capitalist system and they believe in capitalism too. So it's not, to me, it's not an effective argument that capitalist social scientists have come up with these smoke and mirrors sort of ways to measure child poverty. It's very simple. The child is living in poverty if their parents are. It's very simple. You know what I mean? This is what capitalists in the professional managerial class does. They find these ways to sort of make capitalism seem better, or we just need to fix the edges. Oh, it's just child poverty and we just need to do that. And I'll pass it to you, Nick. How can you cut child poverty temporarily? So they were just not broke for 3 months and then 6 months and then went back. That's so, yeah, that's how poverty works. That's it. But go ahead,
Hey,
Nick.
pause right there.
No, I hear what you're saying. I hear.
Like, we read in the article that parents got as much as $300 a month. Do you think that did anything?
Fuck no.
No.
Have you seen
And
what
actually,
groceries cost right now? Like,
especially now, and this was like the end of last year, so it really wasn't as well. It started to get worse from then, you know. But like, you know, and that's actually something that I will ask when I collect data. It's like, like, what do you imagine you're going to do with an X amount of money? If you like, what would ideally a decent child transplant, like, number wise, be, which number would be beneficial to you? But I can imagine $300 now a month ain't gonna go that far. Like clothes, food, childcare, like that, it's literally just cents in this point. So even with the talking point of like how we cut poverty in half, like I still, again, there's a lot more to it, but it just doesn't seem, that doesn't compute. The math doesn't, it's not mathing, as the kids say. You know, like, I'm sure it would help some people, but maybe I would argue that they're not in the position where they really need that much help, that a little extra would have been nice.
Right.
But like, if you're a low income like family, I'm sure that really wasn't, I'm sure it helped a little bit, but not substantially where it really did much of a difference, honestly.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
The biggest criticism, I'll be very short. The biggest criticism of your statement, you said it on the show, but there was so much to unpack on what you said, and we didn't have a lot of time, so we didn't have a lot of time to address it. The big thing that perked my eyebrows up, I think a lot of the criticism comes from when you said, I give Biden credit. And well, I would say we don't have to give him credit, especially if we are running as an opposition, because that study that said that he was going to cut child poverty, it was tied to the minimum wage increase that did not happen. that did not happen. So then, despite they lied about that. So the minimum wage increase supposed to happen. That was supposed to cut child poverty because that addressed the parent issue that CJ's talking about. So the Democratic line about this always was a lie. We need to understand. And then also, now, as someone who don't accept establishment talking points on face value, I am a Marxist. I'm a socialist. I'm talking about what actually is quality of life. What actually is poverty? Because I looked at it. I looked at the poverty tables. You know what they say. A lot of these institutions. A lot of these institutions say if you're a single mother with 2 kids, and you're making $23,000 a year, you're technically out of poverty. That's a joke.
Well, we know
are these the institutions we listen to? Are we listening to these institutions to define poverty for us? So let's say you did get cash after the child tax credit. You're a single mom making $23,000 a year with 2 kids. Congrats, you had $26,000 a year now. How you really lifted her out of poverty? No, you did not under my standard.
No.
So I think that, and you do make a good point when you do mention how Biden was not serious about it. But the criticism is when you get them credit when you don't have to. You understand? Anyway, if you want to respond to that, you can.
Yeah, no, I hear.
Right.
He hears it.
So you heard all of that.
Continues to do that.
Right. So honestly, like this shocked me. You saw like when we, I think you heard it like when we were prepping, like, basically I was just kind of like, what the fuck is this? But I think it gives, especially what I went through last week, what Crab went through last week that I talked about on his show the other night, and then watching this in that context, it was just kind of like, yo, we really got to be really careful with that. And we kind of talked about this anyway.
Yeah.
We weren't necessarily jumping the boat on Cornel West initially. But this just gives more credence to what I was kind of saying over the weekend regarding Peter Dow. But also this is shit for Cornel. Like, dude, you're a theologian. You shouldn't be like promoting like these incremental bullshit. Like,
time to flip over tables.
Like, if you're a man of the Bible, like you should be calling for eradication of poverty completely.
Yeah.
Like, but anyway, so like I brought this up to back up what DJ and Nick was saying. Because this is something that Dr. West should have been discussing with them. So this is from the Children's Defense Fund. This article is written by Nina Dixon Davis.
Yeah.
Where she asks, what would raising the minimum wage mean for children? Hold on, hopefully this works. There we go.
Yep.
Go back up. No, there we go. All right. So she says, improved financial security, improved health, and improved lives. Just a few of the things raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour can accomplish for grown-ups. But what about the 15 million children who live with a worker earning under $15 an hour? What will raising the minimum wage mean for kids? A recent Center for American Progress report suggests that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, along with eliminating the sub-minimum wage for tip workers and workers with disabilities, means better outcome for children too. These gains include increased household incomes for children in all 50 states, better educational, behavioral, and health condition outcomes, and decreased child poverty. So notice how it says decrease.
Yeah.
Not eliminate.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can we eliminate? And that's the thing that we should be talking about. How can we eliminate poverty, period, not just child poverty? Like, give them a minimum wage. And even, again, this reference to what CJ was saying, like, these, like, parameters that people are saying is still within a capitalist system. Like, Bernie, we reported on this, is now pushing for 17.
Mm-hmm.
DC, where I live, is now at 17. And we just read, like, a few weeks ago how there's a sandwich shop near me that are striking to get a minimum wage, even though it's 17. So 15 is not going to cut it in this day and age. So it's still kind of shit.
Yep.
Decreased. How about eliminate? With a 2019 Congressional Budget Office analyst finding that an increased minimum wage would lift more than 50,000 children, 500,000 children out of poverty.
Yeah.
Important caveat, wages alone can't tell the full story of children and families living in poverty. As Sean Femstad, senior fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, points out in a Politico check on President Biden's claim that the current minimum wage is a poverty wage, the poverty standard used by the White House is outdated. We've also reported on that.
Yeah.
In other words, the poverty standard does not account for the cost of childcare, health insurance, transportation, or other necessary goods and services because it reflects a 1950s and 1960s living standard.
That's because, Jack, that's the era I remember. Like, fucking, but what was it? Wasn't it Biden that was like, that's what more kids need in the home is parents who play a record player. Like, that's like 1950s, 1960s shit too.
Right. But no matter the metric used, raising wages is important for adults, important for children, and important for racial equity. The CAP report notes that half of all children living in households with a worker making under $15 an hour are Black or Latinx. The Children's Defense Fund has long made a case that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour should be among the simple improvements and investments policymakers make to end child poverty now. And when now includes equitable recovery and relief from the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that raising the minimum wage is urgent and necessary.
Yeah, but don't tie it to this. Don't tie it to this.
Right.
We already learned this lesson.
Right.
Ugh.
Unfortunately, a higher minimum wage did not make it in the American Recovery Act because the Senate parliamentarian ruled against its inclusion, even though there was broad support that the provisions were allowable. So this goes back to Jake's take that it was Manchin and the GOP's fault.
Right.
We know that the Senate parliamentarian basically ruled it out, and who is in charge of the parliamentarian, especially 2 years ago when they had majorities in the House and Senate.
Yep.
Joe Biden.
Joe. Well,
so
parliamentarian was like whoever the head of, wasn't it like, I want to say it was Manchin there too, wasn't it?
What?
I think it was Manchin there too, wasn't it? Like,
yeah.
Okay. In the Senate?
Yeah.
Someone will tell us. Tell us in the comments below.
Yeah. Yeah. However, the critical fight for a 15 minimum wage must continue. If Congress wants to get serious about improving outcomes for kids, it should enact the Raise the Wage Act of 2021, which calls for gradually raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 and phasing out the sub-minimum wage for tip workers and people with disabilities. CDF is proud to join hundreds of organizations calling for Congress to pass a Raise the Wage Act, whatever. So,
15 an hour doesn't meet the cost of living for the cheapest state in the union.
No.
Like, it doesn't.
No.
It just doesn't.
No.
Friend of
No.
show.
And hold on one second. So I'm going back to West for a second. So Jake, if you want to use our clip to add in some of this extra stuff that we're reporting on, you could, if you want to. But more importantly, Dr. West, Seriously, dude, I love you, but you should, first of all, you should have been called, like everything that you've been saying, you should have mentioned. Nick and C-Day shouldn't have to educate you in order for you to know that and understand that. Number one. And then number two, you're trying to make yourself stand out against the duopoly here. How in the hell are you going to run for president in the Green Party and give praise to Biden for an issue that really he didn't, and does not, and just is a crumb that just deals with part of the problem? So, so anyway, what?
Hey, listen. You never played Zelda, obviously.
No.
Because you would definitely recognize that because it's blared in your ears from a Game Boy Advance about 1,000 times.
But yeah, even with that, as we were saying, like we shouldn't be talking about 15 or even 17 minimum wage now. Like we should be talking now more closer to 25 or more at this
30
at least. Right. At least by now, honestly. So, because that's about the average in pretty much every state now is around 25.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all I'm saying is, have a critical eye and ear for what Dr. West says now, because again, he said this 2 months ago, and if he was on RBN and he was saying all of this, and he's still kind of going back and kind of tinkering these shitty like talking points that you hear in mainstream media, then how is he going to stand himself out compared to the other two?
Right.
And I mean, I'm talking about Biden and Trump. So, but anyway, to end this, Nico, shout out to him, by a hotspot, knocks it out of the park. And since I'm blocked, and since I'm can't hear right now, I'm frozen again. Reef, why don't you just play it?
Okay.
And he will end this segment.
Child poverty rates have more than doubled in 1 year, new census data show. So I guess whenever Bernie Sanders said they cut child poverty in half, technically he was right, because they are literally half the size they used to be because they can't afford to eat. So experts are saying that there are two factors primarily causing this. One, for the average family, the median income has dropped across the board. Two, despite knowing the state of the economy, Congress and President Biden allowed all of the pandemic policies that were benefiting families to expire. And as a result of this bad policy, or Bidenomics, illegal child labor is now on the rise. And there are even some states considering allowing kids as young as 14 to work longer hours, and even allowing kids as young as 14 to work in riskier jobs, such as serving alcohol or manual labor and construction. In other words, while Biden and Kamala are campaigning around the country saying that Bidenomics is the reason that the economy is the best it's ever been, the reality is the economy is so bad that we are literally returning to pre-World War II child labor policies just to get by. So now, because politicians kept kicking the can down the road with bad pandemic policies while they gave bailout after bailout to corporate interests, the most vulnerable of our working class, the children, are suffering the consequences. But just because I want to make sure that parents exhaust all their options in trying to help their kids, I wanted to offer you guys a piece of advice. Have you tried enrolling your kids in a class to learn Ukrainian? Because if you do, maybe then finally Biden and Congress will send you a few dollars. I'm almost positive. Look.
Fatality.
Thanks, Nico.
Yep.
So yeah. So had to rip into Jake a little bit, Dr. West a lot more, but as I said, and I don't hate saying this, but it brings me no pleasure to say this. We gotta watch for Dr. Corey West and whatever, and like the words that are coming out of his mouth as from now. And I think the only thing that I kind of take away from this is I have to watch him with a much more critical eye than I probably had prior to even maybe last week. But now, just given what he said, like, again, this was 2 months ago, dude. Like, giving Brian credit for bullshit.
Well, you do rip into Johnson here. All due respect, but Senator Manchin and GOP aren't the only causes of child poverty increasing. Improvements in child poverty are tied to increasing the minimum wage, which is linked to Senate parliamentarian and the Democrats' lack of urgency. At Common Dreams, we love you guys, and we refer to your organization frequently on Get Indie News. However, sometimes we notice that we have to tell our community the full scope of stories you cover, as they sometimes omit the perspective of independent voices. Yep, couldn't agree more. You know, let us know in the chat what you think. Go in the comments down below. Put it in there. Like, subscribe, do all the stuff. Appreciate you.
All right.
Anyway, speaking of appreciation,
last story.
Caitlin
Aside for this
Johnstone.
one.
So, she's been doing. Occasionally, I see her putting out these kinds of stories of, just kind of getting everyone back into focus. You know, she obviously finds that important. So here she writes, "It's hard to find fulfillment in a civilization that revolves around corporate profits. I know this weighs on everyone's heart right now, you know, and is a difficult thing that all of us go through, especially here. And it's one of the most depressing parts of our society." So she writes, "It's so hard to live as an authentic human being in a civilization whose every molecule is wrapped around something as vapid and soulless as corporate profit. It's what most of us pour most of our life force into. Most people work all day, generating corporate profits to pay bills that go toward corporate profits and pay off loans from giant banks for their corporate profits, or rent from real estate giants for their corporate profits. Then they come home, eat some products from giant mega corporations that they purchased at a supermarket chain, and unwind by watching entertainment created by corporations to draw as many eyeballs as possible, or scrolling through social media platforms designed by corporations to be addictive as possible. We do this while being surrounded all day by advertising designed to pull us into generating more corporate profits." Yes. Yes, in fact. It sounds like you've been listening to a guy I know named Alan Watts, British philosopher, one of the last philosophers, in my opinion. But even Matt Stone and Trey Parker paid homage to Alan Watts, and they made these animations a long time ago, which I'm going to play one of them for you now because it kind of is in the vein of what she's talking about here. And everyone needs to hear more Alan Watts in their lives anyway. So hit play, full screen, do the thing. There we go.
In music, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. And there would be composers who wrote only finales. People go to concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. But we don't see that as something brought by our education into our everyday conduct. We've got a system of schooling that gives a completely different impression. It's all graded. And what we do is we put the child into the corridor of this grade system with a kind of, come on, kitty, kitty, kitty. And yeah, you go to kindergarten, you know, and that's a great thing because when you finish that, you'll get into first grade. And then come on, first grade leads to second grade and so on, and then you get out of grade school, you've got high school, and it's revving up, the thing is coming. Then you're going to go to college, and by Jove, then you get into graduate school, and when you're through with graduate school, you go out and join the world. And then you get into some racket where you're selling insurance, and they've got that quota to make, and you're going to make that. And all the time, this thing is coming. It's coming. It's coming. That great thing, the success you're working for. Then when you wake up one day about 40 years old, you say, my God, I've arrived. I'm there. And you don't feel very different from what you always felt. And there's a slight letdown because you feel there's a hoax. And there was a hoax, a dreadful hoax. They made you miss everything. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, with a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, success or whatever it is, or maybe heaven after you're dead. But we missed the point the whole way along. It was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played.
Makes sense, Care Bear?
Makes plenty of sense.
Cool. I also suggest people watch, he has a talk about life doesn't have purpose. I suggest people watch that. I read that a long time ago, and it's an important watch as well. It's about 10-15 minutes, but you'll see the channel I'm talking about in a bit. But Caitlin continues along the same vein. Corporate profits are our life. Corporate profits are our religion. You saw both of those mentioned from Alan Watts. Most of us pour more of our energy into generating corporate profits throughout our lives than the most pious monk pours into worshiping any deity. Not because we want to, but because we have to. We were born into this bizarre civilization where everything revolves around corporate profits instead of love, relationships, connection, thriving, purpose, or personal depth. This is the thing. You don't need that. But Alan Watts will teach you, Caitlin. So is it indie wonder then that so many of us are suffering from addictions and depression and anxiety? I mean, how could we not be? Take a normal, healthy human animal and throw it into the mess of the dystopian corporate nightmare and tell me how it's meant to live a happy and satisfying life. It's like expecting dolphins and orcas to live happy and satisfying lives in concrete pools at theme parks, or factory farm pigs living in cages barely bigger than their bodies. It's just not the kind of life we're built for. The blink of an eye ago, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers living off the land, spending most of their waking lives under the open sky. Now all of a sudden we're expected to sit 8 hours a day in a cubicle staring at screens for no other reason than to help the corporation that employs us increase its profits. Then commute home under a barrage of advertising in a vehicle made by a corporation using fuels extracted by a corporation, and spend all our free time feeding into the profits of other corporations. Everything in us is screaming that this is insane and unacceptable. That's why some people try to spend time in nature. It's one of the few ways you can get your head above all the corporate bullshit for a bit and take a few desperate breaths of what it's like to be a normal human organism. Nature used to be just the world. There was no other separate thing from nature that we spent all our time in, pouring all our life force into, dedicating all our thoughts and feelings to, from whence we could escape for a few hours on the weekend as a luxury. Now we live in a civilization and sneak out every now and then into this other thing, nature, which screens aren't blaring at us and the trees don't speak the language of the babbling narratives in our heads, though if we're honest with ourselves, our minds are still mostly preoccupied with the pushing and pulling demands that civilization makes of us the entire time. I'm also going to reference this Alan Watts talk on purpose again, which talked frequently about nature and specifically a portion of nature, why it's so important. It's purposelessness. So they don't have a purpose. We attach purpose to all those things, right?
Right.
So, the bird song is for mating, right? Well, what if it's just singing? We're never going to tell that intent. But Alan Watts talks about a Eastern philosophy that translates to purposelessness. It's a terrible translation, but it mimics things like, watching a river flow, right? Watching cranes disappear into clouds, right? Stuff that has no purpose, waves crashing against a shore, that kind of thing, right? But I'm going to also bring this, Alan Watts, here, the illusion of money, time, and ego, because I think it pertains. And this is a channel called After School. Incredible work After School does. Like some of the best stuff on YouTube, in my opinion. Plenty of Alan Watts stuff, including that purposelessness talk. But I'll get into this one. It's about 10 minutes, so just strap right in. It'll be a ride. So, but here we go. After School does these little animations.
Well, I have a sort of suggestion, and that is this, that before we decide either to save the planet or to destroy it, we pause for a moment of silence. I don't mean that kind of grim silence which one observes when somebody says, such and such a famous person has just died, and we'll observe a moment of silence in his honor. And everybody frowns and thinks very serious thoughts. That's not silence at all. I mean real silence, in which we stop thinking and experience reality as reality is. Because after all, if I talk all the time, I can't hear what anyone else has to say. And if I think all the time, and by that I mean specifically talking to yourself subvocally inside your skull, if I think all the time, I have nothing to think about except thoughts. And so I'm never in touch with the real world. Now, what is the real world? Some people have the theory that the real world is material or physical. I say it's made of kind of a stuff. Other people have the theory that the real world is spiritual or mental. But I want you to point out that both those theories of the world are concepts. They are constructions of words. And the real world is not an idea. It is not words. Reality is you will find, therefore, that if you get with reality, all sorts of illusions disappear. And I will mention several illusions that have not this kind of existence. Let's begin with some very down-to-earth ones, like money. Money is a very useful method of accounting. It is a measure of wealth in the same way as inches are measures of length and grams measures of weight. You cannot eat money. You could have a fantastic quantity of dollar bills and stock certificates on a desert island, and they would be useless to you. What you would need would be food and animals and companions. Money simply represents wealth in rather the same way that the menu represents the dinner. Only we are psychologically perverted in such a way that some of us would rather have money than real wealth. But you know, you cannot drive in 5 cars at once, even though they be Cadillacs. You cannot live simultaneously in 6 houses. or eat 12 roasts of beef at one meal. There is a limit to what one can consume. So that's one of the sort of confusions I'm talking about. Another is that we confuse ourselves as living organisms with our idea of ourselves. That is to say, with a conception of myself which is called the personality or ego. That is what we have been told we are. And it's an extremely crude and limited conception of oneself, of the actual unique living organism. And we get unhappy because we're thinking of ourselves in this way, because we think, well, gee, I'm going to die. I once talked to a woman who came to me and said she was afraid of death. And we went into it in a long conversation. I said, what are you really afraid of? And she thought it over, and he said, do you know, what I'm going to be afraid of is what other people are going to say. They're going to say, poor old Gert, she couldn't last it through. Because you see, who you think you are is entirely dependent on who people have told you you are. You're not that. Then another thing that bothers us is time. Most people nowadays say, I have no time. Of course you don't. Because you are not aware of the present. You know, the present is represented on your watch by a hairline that is as thin as possible as is consistent with visibility. And so everybody thinks the present is, instead of, now, the present is the only real time. There is no past, and there isn't a future. And there never will be. We think ordinarily of the present as an infinitesimal point at which the future changes into the past. And we also do a terrible thing. We imagine ourselves to be results of the past. And we're always passing the buck over our shoulders, like when God approached Adam in the Garden of Eden and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And Adam said, this woman thou gavest me, she tempted me and I did eat. And God looked at Eve and said, hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat? And she said, the serpent beguiled me and I did eat. And God, out of the corner of his eye, looked at the serpent. The serpent said nothing. So you see, we're always passing the buck. And don't realize that the past is caused by the present, as the wake of a ship flows back from the prow. Now, the wake doesn't drive the ship any more than the tail wags the dog. But we've all got excuses. Well, my mother had a fit while she was carrying me in the womb. They didn't bring me up right. And then they go to the mother and say, how is it that you could have been so irresponsible with your children? And she says, well, it was my parents didn't bring me up right either. And so everybody passes the buck. But the truth of the matter is, it all begins here. This is where the creation begins. And you're doing it and won't admit it. Because, of course, you're all God in disguise. Jesus found that out, and they crucified him for saying so. So this is a very odd thing for Westerners to understand, and particularly for Americans. Because we are so fixated on the future. When we say we want to put something down, we say it has no future. Well, do you? Much better to have a present. Because if you don't, it's useless to make plans. Because when they work out, you won't be there to enjoy them. You'll be thinking of something else. So we realize that we are living out of now and throwing the past behind us.
The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everyone rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves.
Who does good work. So great books by this guy too, if you ever want to read them. But yeah, so Caitlin continues here. Again, in a similar vein, the only way to live in this civilization without its madness warping you and twisting you in on yourself is to change your relationship with mental narrative, which we just all took a little experience to do, to such an extent that you could recognize that civilization is nature, that the human animal and its products are not separate from anything else in this biosphere we arose from. With a fair amount of dedicated inner work, one can come to recognize that the sea of language we exist in is just narrative. They're just concepts, right? That we don't need to invest any of our life force in believing, and that all the words and thoughts are just energy like all the rest of nature. From that point of view, a busy office full of chattering humans is not experientially much different from a busy forest full of chattering birds and insects. It's just two different expressions of nature. An advertisement is not experientially much different from crashing waves. It's just the sights and sounds of nature taking different energetic shapes. If you're not imbuing any of the narratives inside or outside of your head with the power of belief, it's all just a beautiful expression of nature. That's the only way to live as a happy and healthy human organism in this civilization. From my point of view, everything else is just varying degrees of insanity, adjusting from an unwholesome relationship with mental narrative to a wholesome one lets you live a happy and fulfilling life among the humans who are actually a staggeringly beautiful and thrilling animal when you can see them with fresh eyes. There we go. I'll get you back here. And as an added benefit, changing your relationship with narrative will greatly aid you in seeing through the consent manufacturing propaganda that's used by the powerful to keep the dysfunctionality of this civilization going. If enough people snap out of their unhealthy relationship with narrative, a healthy world will suddenly become possible. Collin, any thoughts? I know I threw a lot at you.
You threw a lot at me, but it kind of makes me think. Oh.
No, you're good.
Okay. It just this is actually in a way kind of what I've been talking about in therapy.
Yep. Kind of. There's a reason why a lot of therapists end up reading this guy.
No, but I think it's just the idea of
we got some time. I could throw another one at people before
we spend so much of our time centered around others.
Yes.
Or other things, rather, and not necessarily think about, you in the midst of all of that. And even in that, you can tune the thing others out or people out and just exist. So it's perfectly fine, and there is ways that you're able to kind of acknowledge what's happening in the world and not kind of give in to it and just be, without necessarily the tie of, oh, I have to get this thing done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon before I go to work. Oh, I have this meeting to get to at 6 after work. Oh, I have this event that I have to think about and plan and raise money for, like save money for, like in a couple of months from now. Or I have to think about this vacation that I plan to take. Like we just,
yeah,
yeah, we just need a point that we just stop.
Yep.
And just be. And which I think it can be added, you know, that I feel like it's a lot easier. And I kind of experienced this when I lived in Africa, because there's not, and I think one of the things I loved about Africa was there's not a shit ton of all this distractions.
Yeah.
That we are inundated with on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Like that it was just so much easier to live a much simpler lifestyle and be okay. Well, I wouldn't say you were okay with it because I'm sure, like, if you're kind of used to the noise, it's very jarring.
Yes.
But once you get used to it, it's very
just
welcome.
noise. Yeah.
Noise.
Yep.
And I think, and yeah, it just reminds me of that because it helped me. That was one of the first times I kind of realized in my life that just how everything we're just kind of inundated with in the West is just such bullshit.
Yeah.
It's just pure distraction that centers you away from the things that are really important, and just the idea of and the way that you should live that is really the most natural self that you can be.
Yep. Well, I will let Alan Watts finish us out here again. This is that thing I was talking about purpose, right? It's another short one, so we'll let it roll and get your thoughts on this before we head out of here. But another after school again. They like Alan Watts. They also like Collin and plenty of other stuff. They do these frequently. So
then, here is a conception of nature.
Remember, he was talking about nature a minute ago, right?
Outside nature, the birds, the bees, the flowers, the mountains, the clouds, and inside nature, human nature. Now, nature isn't trustworthy completely. It'll sometimes let you down with a wallop. But that's the risk you take. That's the risk of life. What's the alternative? I do not trust nature at all. It's got to be watched. You know what that leads to? It leads to 1984 and Big Brother. It leads to the totalitarian state where everybody is his brother's policeman, and where everybody is watching everybody else to report them to the authorities, where you can't trust your own motivation, where you have to have a psychoanalyst in charge of you all the time to be sure that you don't think dangerous thoughts or peculiar thoughts. And you report all peculiar thoughts to your analyst, and your analyst keeps a record of them and reports them to the government. And everybody is busy keeping records of everything. It's much more important to record what happens than what happens. This is already eating us up. It's much more important that you have your books right than that you conduct your business in a good way. In universities, it's much more important that the registrar's records be in order than that the library be well stocked. After all, do you know your grades are all locked up in safes, and they're protected from thievery and pilfering, and they're the most valuable property that the university has. The library can go hang. Then furthermore, the main function of a university is, what any sensible person would imagine, to teach students and to do research. So the faculty should be the most important thing in the university. On the contrary, the administration is the most important thing. The people who keep the records, who make the game rules up. And so the faculty are always being obstructed by the administration and being forced to attend irrelevant meetings and to do everything but scholarship. Do you know what scholarship means? What a school means? The original meaning of a scholar? Leisure. We talked of a scholar and a gentleman because a gentleman was a person who had a private income and he could afford to be a scholar. He didn't have to earn a living, therefore he could study the classics and poetry and things like that. Today, nothing is more busy than a school. They make you work, because you get cut through on schedule. They have expedited courses, and you go to school so as to get a union card, a PhD or something, so that you can earn a living. So that's a whole contradiction of scholarship. Scholarship is to study everything that's unimportant, not necessary for survival.
Yeah.
All the charming irrelevant.
I can pause there.
I just had back to school night earlier. I just came home from that.
Yeah.
No, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what I was kind of talking about. It's like, if you look at the picture with the little kids, like that's why I teach little kids. Because there's still that emphasis of joy and fun and learning and the curiosity and just really listening to kids and what they're interested in and facilitating those interests. Like, that's why I teach pre-K. Like, it's hard work, but it's so innocent at that age. The moment they get into that machine, which unfortunately right now is kindergarten.
Crush them. And as
It's
a kid,
kindergarten.
as a kid with ADHD, like this whole talk from Alan Watts changed a lot of how I perceived my own stuff, right? Like, because of, like, I have literally a lack of forethought. I don't think of the future unless I force myself to. So, like, all this talk of being in the present, that ADHD thing, they think is a, like, ecological, it's an evolution to deal with this, right?
Right.
Like, so yeah, it's we'll let Alan continue to talk about why I say a lot of things like labels are bad. It's because of this guy. So
relevances of life. But you see, the thing is this: if you don't have a room in your life for the playful, life's not worth living.
Yeah.
All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Yep.
But if the only reason...
That's literally where The Shining got it, by the way.
Right.
He said it first.
For which Jack plays is that he can work better afterwards. He's not really playing. He's playing because it's good for him.
Mm-hmm. Are people listening in the chat?
He's not playing at all. You have to be able to be a true scholar. You have to cultivate an attitude to life where you're not trying to get anything out of it. You pick up a pebble on the beach. Look at it. Beautiful. Don't try and get a sermon out of it. Sermons in stones and God in everything be damned. Just enjoy it. Don't feel that you've got to salve your conscience by saying that this is for the advancement of your aesthetic understanding. Enjoy the pebble. If you do that, you become healthy. You become able to be a loving, helpful human being. But if you can't do that, if you can only do things because they are somehow you're going to get something out of it, you're a vulture. So, we have to learn. We don't have to, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to go on living. But it's a great idea. It's a great thing if you can learn what the Chinese call purposelessness. They think nature is purposeless. When we say something's purposeless, that's put down. There's no future in it. It's a washout. But when they hear the word purposeless, they think that's just great. It's like the waves washing against the shore, going on and on and on forever with no meaning. A great Zen master said as his death poem, just before he died, from the bathtub to the bathtub, I have uttered stuff and nonsense. The bathtub in which the baby is washed at birth, the bathtub in which the corpse is washed before burial. All this time I have said many nonsenses. Like the birds in the trees go, twee, 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 twee. What's it all about? Everybody tries to say, oh, it's a mating call. It's purposeful, trying to get their mate, attract them with a song. That's why they have colors. Butterflies have eyes on them. Self-protection. Engineering view of the universe. Why do that? They say, well, it's because they need to survive. Oh, why survive? What's that for? Well, to survive. See, human beings are really a lot of tubes. And all living creatures are just tubes. And these tubes have to put things in at one end and let it out at the other. Then they get clever about it and they develop nerve ganglia on one end of the tube, the eating end, called a head. And it's got eyes in it, it's got ears in it, it's got little organs, antenna and things like this. And that helps you to find things to put in one end so that you can let them out the other. Well, while you're doing this, you see the stuff going through wears the tube out. And so that the show can go on, the tubes have complicated ways of making other tubes who will go on doing the same thing. In at one end, out the other. And they say, well, that's terribly serious. That's awfully important. We've got to keep on doing this. But when Chinese say nature is purposeless, this is a compliment. It's like the idea of the Japanese have a word, yugen. And they describe yugen as watching wild geese fly and be hidden in the clouds. As watching a ship vanish behind a distant island. As wandering on and on in a great forest with no thought of return. Haven't you done this? Haven't you gone on a walk with no particular purpose in mind? Mm-hmm. Carry a stick with you and you occasionally hit at old stumps and wander along and sometimes twiddle your thumbs. It's at that moment that you are a perfectly rational human being. You've learned purposelessness. All music is purposeless. Is music getting somewhere? If it were, if the aim of music of a symphony were to get to the final bar, the best conductor would be the one who got there fastest.
We heard that earlier, right?
See, dancing, when you dance, do you aim to arrive at a particular place on the floor? Is that the idea of dancing? No. The aim of dancing is to dance, is the present. Well, it's exactly the same with our life. We think life has a purpose. I remember the preachers used to say, when I was a small boy, I'd always hear it. We must follow God's purpose, his purpose for you and his purpose for me. When I asked these cats what the purpose was, they never knew. They didn't know what it was. They had a hymn. God is working his purpose out as year succeeds to year. God is working his purpose out and the time is drawing near. The time when the earth shall be full of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. What's the glory of God? It is. Well, they weren't quite sure. I'll tell you what it is. In heaven, all those angels are gathered round the glory of God. That is to say, the which than which there is no whicher. Catholics call it the beatific vision, the Jews call it the Shekinah. And there are all those angels. And they're standing around it and they're saying, Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. Means nothing. They're just having a ball. See, that's what happened in the beginning. When God created the universe, it was created like all stars, all planets, all galaxies. They're vaguely spherical. He created this and he said, have a ball. But before he said that, he said, you must draw the line somewhere. That was the real thing he said first. Before let there be light. That came later. First thing was, you must draw the line somewhere. Otherwise, nothing will happen. You've got to have the good guys, the bad guys. You've got to have this, you've got to have that. The black and white, light and darkness. Must draw the line somewhere. Now, here's the choice then. Are you going to trust it or not? If you do trust it, you may get let down. And this it is yourself, your own nature, and all nature around you. There are going to be mistakes. But if you don't trust it at all, you're going to strangle yourself. You're going to fence yourself round with rules and regulations and laws and prescriptions and policemen and guards, and who's going to guard the guards, and who's going to look after Big Brother to be sure that he doesn't do something stupid. No go. Supposing I get annoyed with somebody in the audience, and I'm going to throw this ashtray at them, but I don't want to hit my friend sitting next to that person. I want to be absolutely sure this ashtray hits that individual. And so I don't trust myself to throw it. I have to carry it along and be sure I hit that person on the head. See, I don't throw it because I can't let go of it. To throw it, I must let go of it. To live, I must have faith. I must trust myself to the totally unknown. I must trust myself to a nature which doesn't have a boss, because a boss is a system of mistrust. That is why Lao Tzu's Tao loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them.
This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now, instead of calling it work. Realize it is play. Another great quote from Alan. But yeah, you know, thanks for being on the journey. So hopefully I lightened people's hearts a little bit, made them be a little introspective tonight. I know it's heavy. I'm sorry for the heaviness, but you know, I think it will help you. Yeah.
It's heavy, but in a good way. It's heavy in a good way. I think especially in light as what's going on in the world right now, and I think especially, I mean, we talk a lot about politics here, but we don't know what's going on in people's lives right now. I think it's hard to kind of be present.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is why see a lot of people in the chat are really kind of really grooving with it. It's hard to be present right now. It's like people are thinking about, there's a lot of shit that we need to think about in terms of future. And it's not even like distant. It's like tomorrow. Like, what are people going to do the next day? And sometimes, you know, like the best that we can do, and I think really just having it be enough, is just do what you can right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for many of us, that's where we're at. But our culture says that's not okay.
Right.
You know, and
that thought process is a detriment, and in this society it tends to be.
Right.
You know, that if you are not completely goal oriented, or if you are not completely, you know, forethoughtful, that can really do you a disservice. Like it said, you know, you get labeled, you know, a washout.
Irresponsible.
Right.
Irresponsible.
Those kind of things. And like, sometimes it's not about that. And the more you are with that, the happier you will probably be.
Right.
At least with, you know,
I mean,
you can be starving and be happy. So, you know.
Yeah. I don't think it's not to say that we shouldn't plan ahead or think in terms of that, but not to let it rule over you in terms of
self-care in that way is also
so
important.
far ahead that you can't focus on what you're doing right now that can be enjoyed. Like,
and I think it's an active, it's an active thing. You have to actively do that, right? You have to occasionally take the time out of your day to just be present, you know, and that takes work for a lot of people. Like Alan Watts said, it shouldn't be work, but you got to work until it's play, you know?
Yeah.
So
It's funny. I feel like, again, for me, because I just started therapy, you know this. Like, I just started therapy recently, and I feel like for me, it's that. Like, because and I think especially for me, like having a job where I have to think about many, many people,
and their
you know,
futures.
like,
Yeah.
and their futures.
Yeah.
Like, it's very hard to kind of focus at times on mine
Right.
and my present.
But those
You know?
children do a thing
And-
that we definitely don't, which is like they play to play. It
Right.
is solely like pleasure driven. It's not like they
Yeah.
didn't think about doing it. They didn't think I've got to play today because if I don't play today, then tomorrow. No, it's just I have blocks right in front of me. I'm going to play with the blocks. Like there's no,
Right.
you know. So I think that's the
Right.
thing of like doing that kind of stuff where it's like, what do you actually enjoy doing? Make sure that's still part of your life. You know,
Right.
like, you know, that's an important thing. Don't sacrifice your goals to make sure that those don't happen. You know, and whatever that is, find the time to do that. You know, so but yeah.
I mean,
Um,
as I say, like working with little kids, they're the best teachers in that, in
You
terms
know?
of being fully present.
feel
Because
free to leave your. Go ahead.
No, but yeah, that's all I'm saying is, you know, that's what when people say be childlike, not childish,
Yes.
but be childlike in terms of
Yep.
just being and just immersing yourself in whatever is that you have and taking full pleasure
Yep.
of that. And and it's funny, like, and I think I actually did say to my therapist this, it's like, my kids are so good at that, and I am so terrible at
Yeah.
it. And I'm supposed to guide them in that,
Right.
right? If anything, they guide me into helping me think about how to be more present.
Yes.
So still something I'm working on, but
Yep. And it's mindfulness,
Um,
and that's why I personally think therapy is helpful if you can afford it. Those are all exercises in mindfulness and presence and all that fun stuff. But look at even Alan Watts isn't perfect. He says so frequently. So
Yeah.
don't take just his account. You know, go listen to some other people. Listen to yourself, all that fun stuff. But yeah, leave your thoughts, comments in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share this with people. You feel like they need to hear it. Mastermind Hour in the chat. My wife has mini Alan Watts books. Yep, in my own way. Good choice. I'm sure that's on there. That was my mother's favorite. But yeah, this guy was saying this stuff long time ago, and he was absolutely right about how if you don't trust it, we're gonna be in the spot we are now. So, you know, it's almost like corporate capital's profits was exactly what he was talking about not trusting that nature thing. So yeah. But anyway, what do we
Before
got
we
coming
go,
up?
should we
Speaking of the present, how about the future? What do we got coming up?
So tomorrow we got Chris on for Bread and Circus.
Yeah.
Friday we got Angel on for Angel in the Afternoon at 2. Thank you.
Yep.
Playing Auntie Anita. No, Tara. I think we can announce this. She's gonna take a little bit
hiatus.
of sabbatical.
Yeah.
She
Same thing with
needs to
Misty
try
at
and
the
figure
minute.
out-
She wants to spend time with her
Right.
children. So
As she
she'll
should.
be off
Be
that
present.
for Saturdays.
What she needs to do, be present with them.
We might do some rando
Sunday,
roundtables,
though,
so stay tuned for eyeing in on that. Sunday.
Nobody Wants to Work Anymore with Indy and Himbo. And then next Monday we have Politically Homeless with Chris and Crab. And then
He's homeless. He's
I can hear that, but that's okay. There we go.
Anyway.
And then I'm sure next week Jesse will be on for American Tradition, and then we'll be back here again.
And the week after, How Do We Miss That will be back. And I've been saving boats for people. So that'll probably be on the 8th of October. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be fun. Or maybe the 1st. Probably the 1st of October.
Yes,
actually.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Hopefully everyone enjoyed.
Season.
If you did enjoy, maybe you'll enjoy some merch. Get some merch right there. Consume. Give profit to profiteers. Do that. You know, as much as we said not to earlier. So
But anything
you know.
you give us, especially for our store, benefits us at least a little bit. So
yeah, we appreciate that. And plus, you get some cool stuff to have. Anyway, I think that's it. I think we did it.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, appreciate everyone being here. Like, subscribe, share. Shout out to our members down there. They're helping us out. But you know, look, we're talking Wombat. You could also be a Wombat that talks. And just, you know, be a member. But yeah, I think I should make sure to remind people that, you know, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Bye, have a great time.